Or, Congress has the power to declare it, but how many times have they actually used that power? And here's the shocking part. America has been involved in hundreds of military conflicts, but Congress has only formally declared war 11 times in the nation's entire history. Today you're going to discover every major war authorization Congress has passed, the controversial debates behind them, and the times when presidents went to war without congressional approval at all. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the constitutional power to declare war has become one of the most debated and abused powers in American government. Make sure you subscribe because this is information every citizen needs to know. Let's start at the beginning. The Constitution gave Congress, not the President, the power to declare war. The founders were terrified of creating another king who could drag the nation into conflict on a whim. So they put that power in the hands of the people's representatives. The first test came in 1812 when President James Madison asked Congress to declare war on Britain. After weeks of heated debate, Congress narrowly approved the War of 1812. This was the first and one of the few times the constitutional process actually worked as intended. Congress debated, voted, and formally declared war. The Mexican-American War of 1846 was more controversial. President James Polk sent troops into disputed territory, provoking a Mexican attack. He then went to Congress claiming Mexico had shed American blood upon American soil. Congress declared war, but many believed Polk had manipulated them into it. A young congressman named Abraham Lincoln challenged Polk to show the exact spot where American blood was shed, arguing the president had essentially manufactured a justification for war. This established a pattern we'd see again and again, presidents creating situations that force Congress's hand. The Spanish-American War of 1898 came after the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. "Remember the Maine" became the rallying cry, even though we still don't know if Spain was actually responsible. Congress declared war, and America suddenly became a colonial power with territories in the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The war lasted only a few months, but it marked America's emergence as a global military power. World War I was different. When war broke out in Europe in 1914, America tried to stay neutral. But after Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram revealed German attempts to ally with Mexico against the U.S., President Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war in 1917. The speech was powerful, framing it as a war to make the world safe for democracy. Congress voted overwhelmingly for war, though a handful of members, including the first woman in Congress, Jeannette Rankin, voted no. The debate showed how war declarations could unite a nation, but also how dissent was punished. Anti-war activists were jailed under the Espionage Act. World War II brought the most famous war declaration in American history. The day after Pearl Harbor, December 8, 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt addressed Congress calling it a date which will live in infamy. Congress declared war on Japan with only one dissenting vote, again from Jeannette Rankin, the only member to vote against both world wars. Days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., and Congress reciprocated. These were the last formal declarations of war America has ever issued. Think about that. The last time Congress formally declared war was 1941, yet America has been in constant military conflict ever since. Here's where things get really interesting, and if you're still watching, drop a like because this next part will blow your mind. After World War II, the nature of war authorizations completely changed. The Korean War in 1950 had no congressional declaration. President Truman called it a police action under United Nations authority and sent troops without asking Congress. This set a precedent that presidents could wage war without formal declarations. Congress went along with it, afraid of looking weak during the Cold War. The Vietnam War escalated through one of the most controversial authorizations ever, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution of 1964. President Johnson claimed North Vietnamese boats attacked American destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. He asked Congress for authority to take all necessary measures to defend U.S. forces. Congress passed it almost unanimously, with only 2 senators voting against it. But here's the scandal: the second attack probably never happened. The evidence was murky at best, possibly fabricated at worst. Johnson used that resolution to escalate the war into a decade-long disaster that killed over 50,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese. Years later, Congress repealed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, admitting they'd been misled. If you think Congress learned from that mistake, keep watching. After Vietnam, Congress tried to reassert its war powers by passing the War Powers Resolution of 1973 over President Nixon's veto. This law required presidents to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops and to get congressional authorization if forces remained deployed beyond 60 days. Sounds great, right? Except every president since Nixon has claimed the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional, and presidents have routinely ignored it. Congress rarely enforces it because members don't want to be blamed for tying the president's hands during a crisis. The first Gulf War in 1991 saw President George H.W. Bush ask Congress for authorization to drive Iraq out of Kuwait. After intense debate, Congress approved the use of force by a narrow margin in the Senate. This was seen as Congress reasserting itself, but notice the language. It wasn't a declaration of war, it was an authorization for the use of military force. That distinction matters because it gave the president broad discretion rather than a specific, limited war declaration. Then came September 11, 2001, and everything changed. 3 days after the attacks, Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF, allowing the president to use force against those responsible for 9/11. The vote was overwhelming, 420-1 in the House, 98-0 in the Senate. Only Representative Barbara Lee voted no, warning that the authorization was too broad and would lead to perpetual war. She was right. That single authorization, written in just 60 words, has been used to justify military action in at least 19 countries over more than 2 decades. It's been used for wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and more. Presidents have interpreted it so broadly that it now authorizes strikes against groups that didn't even exist in 2001. The Iraq War Authorization of 2002 is equally controversial. President George W. Bush claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and ties to al-Qaeda. Secretary of State Colin Powell gave a presentation at the UN showing supposed evidence. Congress debated and voted to authorize force, with 77 senators and 296 House members supporting it. But the evidence was wrong. There were no weapons of mass destruction. The intelligence was flawed, exaggerated, or deliberately manipulated depending on who you ask. The war lasted years, cost trillions of dollars, killed hundreds of thousands of people, and destabilized the entire Middle East. Many members who voted for it later said they were misled, but the damage was done. Here's what's really alarming, and make sure you're subscribed because this affects you right now. Those post-9/11 authorizations are still in effect. Presidents continue using them to justify military action without going back to Congress. The 2001 AUMF has been cited in over 40 military operations. It's the forever authorization for forever wars. Congress has tried multiple times to repeal or replace it, but they can't agree on new language, so the old authorization just keeps getting used. President Obama launched military action in Libya in 2011 without congressional authorization, claiming it didn't require approval because American forces weren't in sustained combat. Congress protested but did nothing to stop it. President Trump ordered strikes in Syria without congressional approval. President Biden has continued operations in multiple countries under the same old authorizations from 2001 and 2002. The pattern is clear. Over 230 years, we've gone from Congress carefully debating formal war declarations to presidents launching military action based on decades-old authorizations or no authorization at all. The constitutional system of checks and balances on war has essentially collapsed. Congress is too divided to pass new authorizations, too afraid of political consequences to restrict presidential power, and too comfortable letting presidents take the blame when wars go wrong. Here's the controversial part that gets people heated in the comments. Is this actually a problem? Some argue that modern warfare requires speed and flexibility that 535 members of Congress can't provide. Waiting for debates and votes could cost lives and strategic advantage. But others argue this is exactly why the founders created the system they did, to make war hard to start, to require national consensus, to prevent hasty decisions. The debate intensified recently when strikes against Iranian targets, operations against ISIS, and potential conflicts with China have all raised the question: can a president start a war with a major power without Congress? Legally, no. Practically, it happens in slow motion where presidents take incremental steps that eventually add up to war without any single moment where Congress votes. Like this video if you think Congress has abdicated its war powers. Comment below whether you think presidents should need congressional approval before military action or whether that's outdated in the modern world. Share this with someone who thinks civics is boring, because there's nothing more important than understanding who has the power to send Americans to war. Subscribe right now because we're building a community of informed citizens who refuse to accept "that's just how things work" as an answer. Turn on notifications because next week we're covering every presidential executive order that bypassed Congress entirely. Every view, every like, every subscription tells YouTube to show this to more people. And the more people who understand how war authorizations actually work versus how they're supposed to work, the better equipped we are to demand accountability from our representatives. Congress works for us. It's time they remembered that, especially when American lives are on the line.